Get out of my kitchen right now! Diana's scream echoed through the entire house like a whip. My hands were shaking as I held the wooden spoon I had used for 30 years. She was there, in my kitchen, using my pots, my ingredients, cooking for her entire family as if she owned the place, and the worst part hadn't even happened yet. My son Chris ran into the kitchen. Instead of defending me, instead of reminding his wife that this was his mother's house, he started clapping. Yes, clapping, like he was at a show. That's right, honey. Finally, someone put her in. But he didn't have time to finish the sentence, because in that moment something inside me broke. Or maybe it finally woke up. Let me back up a bit so you understand how I got to that moment of absolute humiliation. My name is Martha. I'm 63 years old, and for the last 5 years I have lived a silent hell in my own home. When Chris introduced me to Diana 6 years ago, I thought my son had finally found someone who would make him happy. She was young, 32, pretty with that kind of beauty that comes with a lot of self-confidence. Too much confidence, I'd say now. At our first dinner, she barely spoke to me. She only talked to Chris, constantly touching his arm, laughing loudly at his jokes that weren't even funny, ignoring me as if I were part of the furniture. But I kept quiet. Like a good mother, I wanted my son to be happy. I swallowed the discomfort, the feeling of being invisible at my own table. Give her time, I told myself. She's nervous, it's normal. How naive I was. The wedding was 5 years ago, an expensive ceremony that I helped pay for even though Diana told everyone her parents funded the whole thing. I remember at the reception, they sat me at a table in the back far from the main table next to distant cousins I didn't even know. Meanwhile, Diana shined in her ivory dress, and Chris looked at her like she was the only person in the world. I didn't exist. I cried in my hotel room that night, but I dried my tears quickly. It's their day, I repeated to myself. This isn't about you, Martha. After the wedding, they moved into a small apartment. They lasted exactly 8 months. 8 months before Chris showed up at my door with a suitcase and that awkward smile he always had when he needed something. Mom, it's temporary, he said. Just until our financial situation improves. Diana is looking for a better job, and I'm waiting for a promotion. I had a 3-bedroom house, too big for just me since I was widowed. Of course, son, I said. This will always be your home. If I had known that temporary would become a 5-year nightmare, I would have locked the door right then. The first few months were tolerable. Diana worked at an expensive clothing boutique downtown. She left early and came home late. I barely saw her. Chris worked at a tech company, always glued to his computer, always stressed. I continued with my normal routine. I cooked, I cleaned, I took care of my house just like I always had. But little by little, things started to change. First, it was small comments. Martha, could you wash my clothes too? I just get so tired from work. Martha, you use too much salt in the food. That's not how you cook. Martha, don't you think it's time to update the living room furniture? It looks so old. I endured it. I swallowed my pride and endured it because I didn't want to create conflict. Because I loved my son and wanted his marriage to work. Because I had been taught that a good mother always sacrifices, always gives, and always puts her family first. But Diana wasn't my family, even if she carried my late husband's last name. Diana was a stranger who every day made me feel more like a stranger in my own home. 6 months after moving in, she quit her job at the boutique. I'm exhausted, she told Chris. I need a break. That break has now lasted 4.5 years. 4.5 years of watching her lying on my sofa, watching television while I cleaned around her as if I were a maid. And Chris, my son, the boy I raised alone after his father died in that accident when he was only 12, he just supported her in everything. Mom Diana is going through a tough time, he would tell me. She needs time to find herself. Find herself. While I cooked, cleaned, washed her clothes, and she didn't even say good morning to me. The respect completely evaporated. She started giving me orders. Martha, I want chicken for dinner tonight. Martha, my family is coming this weekend. I need you to clean the house, really clean it. Martha, don't use that detergent. It ruins my clothes. My clothes. My house, as if I were the guest and she were the owner. But that day, Diana's birthday exactly 1 week ago, was different. It was the day everything changed, even if they didn't know it yet. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the kitchen making my breakfast. Just coffee and some toast. Nothing elaborate. I heard the front door open and the loud voices of Diana and her mother Betty coming in loaded with grocery bags. "Today, I'm going to show my family that I'm the best cook," Diana yelled excitedly. Betty laughed. "My girl, you've always been talented in the kitchen, not like some others." And she looked at me. She looked at me with that contempt I already knew so well. They burst into the kitchen like a tornado. Diana started pulling bags out onto my table, throwing packages of meat, vegetables, bottles of wine. "I'm going to make my famous stew," she announced, while I just stood there, my coffee cup in hand, invisible. Betty opened my refrigerator without asking permission, pulling out my ingredients, my things. "There's an onion here, perfect," she said. "And look, she has good spices." My spices. The ones I had collected for years. Some brought back from trips. Others gifts from my sister Doris. I tried to speak. "Excuse me, I was—" But Diana cut me off with that tone you use when speaking to an annoying child. "Martha, today is my birthday, and I'm going to cook for my family in this kitchen. Could you do us a favor and—" She didn't finish the sentence. She just pointed to the door with her finger, like shooing a dog. Something inside me burned. 30 years. I had been cooking in that kitchen for 30 years. I had renovated the cabinets with my own savings 10 years ago. I had chosen every single one of the cream-colored tiles that decorated the walls. I had bought every pot, every pan, every knife with the money I earned from my job. But I stayed quiet, because that's what I always did. Kept quiet, swallowed my pride, smiled. "Of course," I muttered, and started walking toward the door. Then I heard Betty whisper to Diana, but just loud enough for me to hear perfectly. "You finally put her in her place. This house needed a real owner." And they laughed. Both of them laughed as I walked out of my own kitchen with my head down and my heart shattered. I sat in my room listening to the noises coming from the kitchen. The banging of my pots, the opening and closing of my cabinets, their laughter. 2 hours later, the guests started to arrive. Diana's family. Her father, Ernest, a fat, smug man who always talked about his successful used car business. Her 2 sisters, Jasmine and Iris, as arrogant as she was. Cousins, uncles, all entering my house without even greeting me. I stayed in my room like a prisoner, smelling the aroma of the stew that Diana was cooking with my ingredients in my pots in my kitchen. Then I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. It was Chris. He opened my bedroom door without knocking. "Mom? What are you doing locked up in here? Come down, it's Diana's party." I looked at him. I looked at my son, this 37-year-old man I no longer recognized. "Chris, she kicked me out of my own kitchen," I said, and my voice cracked a little. He sighed as if I were a burden, as if I were the problem. "Mom, please don't be dramatic. It's her birthday, let her enjoy it. Besides—" He stopped, but I knew what he was going to say. It was always the same. "Besides, she's stressed, she has a lot on her mind." It was always Diana's stress. It was never her lack of respect. I went down to the party because I didn't want to look like the villain. I put on a gray dress. I had saved something simple but presentable, and I went downstairs with a forced smile. The living room was full of people, my living room with my furniture, my photographs on the walls. But I was a stranger. Nobody greeted me. Nobody. I stood by the entrance like a ghost, watching everyone laugh and talk. Diana was in the center telling some story while everyone listened, captivated. Chris was next to her, his arm around her waist, looking at her with adoration. And I, his mother, was invisible. Then Diana announced that the food was ready. Everyone moved toward the dining room. I followed, hoping to find a place to sit. But when I got there, all the chairs were taken. All of them. I just stood there, feeling the blood rush to my cheeks in shame. Ernest looked at me and let out a laugh. "Looks like there's no room for you. Martha, why don't you eat in the kitchen? After all, you spend all your time there anyway." Laughter. Everyone laughed. And Chris said nothing. My son said absolutely nothing. But then something happened that changed everything. I turned to leave to hide in my room and cry in private humiliation when my phone buzzed. It was a text. I pulled it out of my dress pocket and read it quickly. It was from Henry, my accountant. "Martha, urgent. I need to talk to you about the house documents. I found something you need to know. Chris tried to refinance your property using fake documents. Call me." My blood ran cold. Did it end there, Noam? This was just the beginning. I read the message 3 times to make sure I understood. Chris, my son, had tried to refinance my house using fake documents. My house. The house I bought 25 years ago with my own money, with my own effort, sweat, and tears. The house that was in my name, and my name only because after my husband died, I learned not to depend on anyone. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. I looked toward the dining room where everyone was still laughing and eating, oblivious to the bomb that had just exploded in my hands. Chris was pouring wine for the guests with that charming smile he always had, the same smile he used as a child when he broke something and tried to convince me it wasn't his fault. I went up to my room without anyone noticing I was gone. Why would they notice I was invisible in my own home? I locked the door and called Henry immediately. He answered on the second ring. "Martha, thank you for calling back so quickly." His voice sounded serious, worried. Henry had been my late husband's accountant and then became my personal accountant. He was a man in his 60s, honest, meticulous, someone I trusted completely. "Henry, what is going on?" I asked, although a part of me already knew the answer. I already knew that my son, the boy I had raised alone, had betrayed me. 2 weeks ago, I got a call from the bank, Henry began. They were asking about some documents that I had supposedly certified for a refinancing of your property. Documents I have never seen in my life. Someone forged my signature and submitted papers where you supposedly gave Chris power of attorney over the house. I felt the air leave my lungs. Fortunately, Henry continued, the bank suspected something because the amounts didn't add up, and they contacted me to verify. I stopped everything immediately and opened an investigation. Martha, the documents have Chris's signature all over them. He tried to put the house in his name to take out a $150,000 loan. $150,000. My house was worth about $400,000. Chris had tried to put a lien on my property for more than 1/3 of its value without my knowledge, using fake documents, committing fraud. How could he do this? I whispered, though the question was rhetorical. I knew how. Diana. That woman had changed him. She had turned him into someone I no longer recognized. There's more, Henry said, his tone turning even more grave. I did a little digging and discovered that Chris and Diana have debts of almost $200,000. Credit cards, personal loans, a luxury car they can't afford. They are on the verge of bankruptcy. Everything started to make sense. Diana's comments about renovating the house, the looks Chris and her exchanged when they thought I wasn't watching, the way they had been treating me even worse lately, with more contempt, as if they wanted me gone, as if I were an obstacle to their plans. Martha, I need you to come to my office on Monday, Henry said. I have all the documents. We can press charges for fraud if you want. This is serious. I thanked him and hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the photographs on my nightstand. Chris as a baby, Chris at his graduation, Chris on his wedding day smiling next to Diana. At what point did I lose my son? That night, after all the guests left and the house was a disaster of dirty plates and empty bottles, I heard Chris and Diana talking in their room. My room was right next to theirs, and the walls weren't that thick. It wasn't that I wanted to listen. I just heard. I don't understand why the bank rejected the loan, Diana said in a frustrated voice. Those documents were perfect. Your friend Matt said there wouldn't be a problem. Matt. Another name to add to my list of traitors. Matt had been Chris's friend since high school. Now he worked in some shady financial consulting business. Someone at the bank must have gotten suspicious, Chris replied. But don't worry, we'll find another way. We need that money, Chris, Diana insisted. The collectors aren't going to wait any longer. If we don't pay soon, they're going to sue us. And your mother just sitting in this huge house all by herself, it's a waste. This property is worth a fortune. My blood boiled. A waste. This house that I had paid for, that I had maintained, that I had filled with my family's memories. "I know my love," Chris said, and his voice had that manipulative tone that hurt me so much to hear. "I'm working on a plan, trust me." I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything I had heard about the betrayal of my own son. But something strange happened in those dark, quiet hours. Instead of just feeling pain, I started to feel something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Rage. But not a blind, destructive rage. It was a cold, calculated rage that made me think clearly for the first time in years. They didn't know who I really was. Chris only knew the Martha who cooked, cleaned, and sacrificed, the devoted mother who always gave in. But there was another Martha he had never met, a Martha who had quietly built something great. Sunday morning. I went downstairs early. The house was still a disaster from the party the day before, but I wasn't going to clean for the first time in 5 years. I left everything exactly as it was, the dirty dishes in the sink, the empty bottles in the living room, the crumbs on the floor. I made my coffee and sat in the living room to think. Chris came down around 11, yawning, expecting to find the house clean as always. He stopped short when he saw the mess. "Mom, aren't you going to clean this?" he asked in that tone he used when giving me orders disguised as questions. I looked him directly in the eye. "No," I said simply. "It was Diana's party. She can clean it." His expression changed. Surprise, then annoyance. "Mom, don't start with your drama. You know Diana is tired." I got up and walked to the kitchen without answering. I could feel his confused gaze on my back. That was the first of many small changes I implemented. I stopped cooking for them. I stopped washing their clothes. When Diana asked me for something, I simply told her I was busy. I didn't yell, I didn't complain, I just refused. And that unnerved them more than any confrontation. They were used to me giving in, to me obeying. My silent rebellion made them nervous. On Monday, I went to Henry's office. He showed me all the documents. There was the forged signature, the papers where Chris tried to pass himself off as the owner of my property. "I have contacts at the bank," Henry told me. "They are willing to testify if you decide to take legal action." I looked at the papers for a long time. My son. My only son. "Not yet," I said finally. "I want to see how far they're willing to go. But I need you to protect my properties. All of them." Henry nodded. "It's already done. I've put alerts on everything. They can't touch anything without me knowing immediately." Properties. Plural. Because that was something Chris and Diana never knew. For the last 30 years, while I played the role of a simple homemaker, I had built a silent empire. But that story would come later. For now, I needed to watch, wait and see just how far my son was willing to betray me for money, and for that woman who had turned him into a stranger. I returned home that afternoon with my head held high and a plan forming in my mind. When I entered, I found Diana in the living room with her mother Betty and her sisters Jasmine and Iris. The four of them looked at me with contempt as I walked by. "There goes the bitter old woman," I heard Iris mutter. I stopped. I turned around and looked at them directly. For the first time, I didn't lower my gaze, and I smiled. That smile confused them. I could see it on their faces. Jasmine exchanged a confused look with Iris, and Betty frowned as if trying to solve a puzzle. But I said nothing. I just went up to my room, closed the door, and allowed myself to breathe deeply. Something had changed in me. I was no longer the Martha who endured in silence. I was the Martha who had survived her husband's death, who had raised a son alone, who had built a prosperous business from scratch without anyone knowing. And now, finally, I was going to remember who I really was. The next few days were tense in the house. Chris and Diana noticed my change in attitude, but they didn't know how to handle it. I continued to not cook for them, not clean their messes, not be their free maid. One night, Chris knocked on my bedroom door. "Mom, can we talk?" I let him in. He sat in the chair by my desk with that uncomfortable expression he put on when he needed to ask me for something. "Mom, Diana and I are worried about you. You've been acting strange lately. Is everything okay?" How ironic. After 5 years of treating me like trash, now they were worried because I wasn't behaving like the doormat I always was. "Everything is perfectly fine, Chris," I answered calmly. "I'm just tired." "At my age, one needs to rest more." He seemed to relax a little. "Oh, well, that makes sense. Hey, since you mentioned that..." Here it came. I could feel it. Diana and I were thinking, "This house is very big for you alone. Maybe it would be better if..." "If what?" I interrupted, looking him directly in the eye. He swallowed. "Well, there are some very nice nursing homes, places where you could be more comfortable with people your age, with medical care available." Nursing homes. They wanted to put me in a home to keep my house. I felt my heart squeeze, but I kept my face neutral. "And who would pay for this home?" I asked. "Well, we could sell this house, and with that money..." "This house is in my name, Chris." I interrupted him again, my voice firm. "And it is not for sale." His expression changed. I saw a flash of panic in his eyes, followed by annoyance. "Mom, don't be selfish. Think about your well-being. You're getting older. This house is too much work for you." Selfish. My own son was calling me selfish for not wanting to gift him my property. "This conversation is over, Chris. You can leave." He stood up, clearly frustrated. "Someday you'll understand this is for your own good," he said before leaving and shutting the door harder than necessary. That same night, I heard their conversations through the walls again. "It didn't work," Chris was telling Diana. "She refuses to consider the idea of the home." "Then we'll have to be more creative," Diana replied. "Your mother can't stand in the way of our future. This house is our only way out." "I know, my love. Give me time. I'll convince her." I stayed up late thinking about my next move. The next day I called my sister Doris. She lived in another state, but we spoke frequently. Doris was the only person in the world who knew my whole story, all my secrets. "Martha." "What's wrong?" "You sound strange," she said as soon as she answered. I told her everything. The attempted fraud, the conversations I had overheard, the plan to put me in a home. Doris exploded. "That bastard! After everything you did for him. Martha, you have to kick him out of your house right now." "No," I said calmly. "Not yet. I need them to see who I really am, to understand the magnitude of their mistake." Doris was silent for a moment. "You're going to tell them about the restaurants." "Eventually. But first, I need them to sink a little deeper into their own lies." My sister sighed. "You're stronger than you look, Martha. You always have been. But be careful. Desperate people do terrible things." She was right, and Chris and Diana's desperation was about to get worse. 2 days later, while I was at the grocery store, I got a call from my neighbor, Mrs. Esmeralda. She was a kind, 70-year-old woman who had lived next door for decades. "Martha, forgive me for bothering you, but I saw something strange. A man in a suit was taking pictures of your house. He had a clipboard and was writing things down." I thanked her and hung up. An appraiser. They were appraising my house without my permission. My blood boiled, but I stayed calm. They were moving faster than I thought. When I got home, Chris and Diana were in the living room with a man in his 40s dressed in a charcoal-colored suit. They went quiet when they saw me walk in. "Mom, this is Mr. Matt, an old friend." Matt. The same one who had helped with the fake documents. He extended his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A pleasure, Mrs. Martha. Chris has told me so much about you." I didn't take his hand. I stared at him until he lowered his arm awkwardly. "What are you doing in my house?" I asked directly. "Oh, I just came to visit Chris. It's been a while since we saw each other." Liar. Everyone in that room was a liar. I went up to my room without another word. From my window, I watched them leave half an hour later. Matt was patting Chris on the back, talking animatedly. That night, I went down to the kitchen for a glass of water and found papers on the dining room table. They had left them there, probably carelessly. They were documents from a real estate agency, an appraisal of my house, $410,000, and attached a draft of a sales contract. My house. They were planning to sell my house. The document was dated for the following month. They had already even chosen the day they planned to strip me of my home. I took pictures of all the papers with my phone and left them exactly where I found them. The next day, I sent them to Henry. He called me immediately. "Martha, this is evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. With this and the previous documents, we can—" "Not yet, Henry," I interrupted. "Let them continue. I want them to feel secure to believe they are going to get away with it." "Are you sure this is very serious?" "Completely sure. Just make sure they can't do anything official without me knowing." Henry agreed reluctantly. He trusted me even if he didn't fully understand my plan. The following days, Chris and Diana were unusually nice to me. Fake smiles, questions about my health, small gestures of concern. It was obvious what they were doing. They were softening me up, preparing me for the final blow. One afternoon, Diana even tried to cook for me. "Martha, I made soup. Do you want some?" I looked at her from my chair in the living room. "No, thank you. I already ate." Her smile tightened, but she held it. "Well, if you change your mind, it's on the stove." How considerate. The same woman who had kicked me out of my kitchen was now offering me soup. The same one planning to steal my house was now playing the part of the loving daughter-in-law. That night, Chris knocked on my door again. He came in with that serious expression he put on when he wanted to seem mature and responsible. "Mom, Diana and I have been talking a lot about your situation. My situation, as if I were a problem that needed to be solved. We want what's best for you. And honestly, we think it would be best if you considered selling this house. It's too big, too expensive to maintain for one person alone. You could move somewhere smaller, more manageable, and save the money from the sale for your retirement." How generous of them to worry about my retirement. "And where would you two live?" I asked, although I knew the answer perfectly well. "Well, we could look for our own place, with our share of the money." Of course. Their share of my house. "How much would your share be exactly, Chris?" He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Well, the house is worth around $400,000. We thought it would be fair to split it equally. $133,000 for each of us." For each of them. Him, Diana, and me. They wanted to steal 2/3 of the value of my property. My son looked at me waiting for an answer with the face of someone doing me a favor. And I, for the first time in a long time, smiled genuinely. Because I finally understood that the son I had raised no longer existed. And that truth, though painful, set me free. "I'll think about it," I told Chris, my voice calm. His face lit up immediately. "Really, Mom? That's great. I knew you'd see reason." See reason? As if I were the irrational one for not wanting to give away my assets. "But I need time," I added. "This is a big decision. Give me a few weeks." He nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, Mom, all the time you need. We just want you to be happy." He practically skipped out of my room. I heard him run down the stairs to give Diana the news. Their shouts of celebration reached my room. They were celebrating my supposed defeat. Poor fools. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, while Chris was at work, and Diana was sleeping in late as usual, I left the house early. I drove to the other side of the city, to an area Chris never visited. I parked in front of a modern 3-story building with an elegant sign that read, "Taste of Home Headquarters." My heart beat strongly as I walked in. The receptionist, a young woman named Jasmine, who had worked with me for 2 years, greeted me with a huge smile. "Mrs. Martha, what a surprise to see you here. You usually manage everything from home." "I needed to come in person today," I said. "Is Salvador in his office?" Salvador was my general manager, a man in his 50s, efficient and discreet, who had been my right-hand man for the last 15 years. He was one of the few people who knew my true identity. To the rest of the business world, I was simply Mrs. M., the invisible owner who preferred to stay in the shadows while others handled the daily operations. I went up to the 3rd floor and knocked on his office door. "Come in." Salvador looked up from his computer, and his serious expression transformed into a warm smile. "Martha, please come in. Coffee." "Please." I sat across from his desk while he prepared 2 cups from the coffee maker in his office. "How are things?" I asked. Salvador handed me a thick folder. "Excellent. The downtown restaurant is still the most profitable. The one on the north side has increased its sales by 22% this quarter, And the new location we opened on the coast is exceeding our expectations. I opened the folder and reviewed the numbers. Taste of Home, my restaurant chain, 5 locations in total, all successful, all under my name, though nobody knew it. I had started with the first one 30 years ago, shortly after my husband died. I needed money to support Chris, but I also needed to stay busy, to have a purpose beyond just surviving. I started small with a tiny spot where I cooked and served myself. I used all my family recipes, the ones my grandmother had taught me. Homemade, authentic food made with love. The business grew slowly but steadily. I reinvested every penny of profit. 5 years later, I opened the second restaurant, then the third. I hired Salvador when the business became too big for me to handle alone, but I always kept it a secret. Why? Because I wanted Chris to love me for who I was, not for my money. I wanted to know his love was genuine, not contaminated by financial interests. How ironic that decision turned out to be. Net income last year was $1,200,000, Salvador continued. After taxes, operating expenses, and reinvestments, your personal profit was $350,000. $350,000 in 1 year. And my son thought I was a poor widow who depended on his generosity by living under his roof. In my roof. Salvador, I need to ask you a favor, I said. Anything you need. I want you to prepare a complete report of all our assets. Properties, bank accounts, investments, everything. And I need copies of the property titles for all the locations. He looked at me with curiosity, but asked no questions. That was one of the reasons I trusted him. When do you need it? By Friday. Today was Tuesday. You'll have it by Thursday, he promised. I spent the rest of the morning in my private office reviewing financial statements, signing pending documents, making decisions about new investments. This was the Martha that Chris never knew, the businesswoman, the strategist, the woman who had built an empire from scratch. When I returned home, it was almost noon. Diana was in the living room watching television in her pajamas. She didn't even look up when I came in. "Where were you?" she asked in a bored tone. "I went to the doctor." I lied. "Routine checkup." She mumbled, with no real interest in my answer. The next few days were strangely quiet. Chris and Diana were being excessively nice to me, clearly trying to keep me happy while they planned their theft. I followed my normal routine, or at least what appeared to be my normal routine. But in reality, I was preparing my counterattack. On Thursday, just as promised, Salvador handed me a thick manila envelope with all the documents I had requested. I reviewed it that night in my room. 5 restaurants. The house where we lived valued at $410,000. 2 apartments I rented out, generating a passive income of $3,000 a month. Investment accounts with a total balance of $1.8 million. Additional real estate properties worth $900,000. In total, my net worth was approximately $5 million. $5 million. And my son wanted to steal my house to pay his $200,000 debts. If only he had just asked me for help honestly. If only he had respected me. But no. They chose the path of deceit, of betrayal, of treating me like trash. On Friday afternoon, as I was putting all the documents in my personal safe, I heard raised voices downstairs. I went down the stairs and found Diana arguing on the phone. "No, Dad, I already told you we're going to get the money soon. We just need a little more time." She paused, listening. Her face turned red with fury. "You can't do that. It's my car. I need it." Another pause. Fine. 3 weeks. I promise you in 3 weeks we will have the money." She slammed the phone down so hard she almost broke it. Then she saw me standing on the stairs. "How long have you been there?" "I just came down." I lied. "Is everything okay?" She forced a smile. "Yes, just small family problems. Nothing important. Small problems." Her father, Ernest, was about to repossess her car for lack of payment. The walls were closing in on them. That night, Chris came home later than usual. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes and looked haggard. He sat in the living room with his head in his hands. Diana sat next to him, rubbing his back. "What happened?" "I got called into HR. There are rumors of layoffs. I might lose my job." The panic was visible on his face. They were drowning in their own mistakes, in their own greed. Part of me, the part that was still a mother, wanted to help them. I wanted to tell them everything would be okay, that I had the resources to save them. But another part, the part that had been humiliated, despised, and betrayed, wanted them to learn their lesson the hard way. "Mom," Chris said when he saw me, "we need to talk about the house. Have you made a decision?" There it was, the pressure, the desperation making them show their true faces. "Almost," I said. "I just need to resolve some legal details first." His expression lit up with hope. "Legal details. Yes, I want to make sure everything is done correctly. My lawyer is advising me." The word lawyer made them nervous. They exchanged a quick look full of worry. "Lawyer? Why do you need a lawyer?" Diana asked, trying to sound casual, but failing miserably. "To protect my interests," I replied simply. "And yours too, of course." I left them there, processing that information, wondering what exactly I knew. I went up to my room with a smile on my lips. The game was reaching its critical point. Soon, very soon, they were going to find out who I really was, and that discovery was going to shatter their little world of lies. I looked out the window at the dark street. The storm was about to arrive, and I was going to be the thunder that woke them from their illusion. The following Monday, I received an unexpected call. It was Ernest Diana's father. "Mrs. Martha, excuse the bother. Could we talk for a moment?" His voice sounded unusually serious. "Of course, Ernest. What is it about?" There was a long pause. "I'd prefer to speak in person. Can I stop by your house this afternoon?" I agreed, curious to know what he wanted. At 3 in the afternoon, Ernest knocked on my door. I had him come into the living room. Chris and Diana weren't there. They had gone out to do who knows what. Ernest sat on the sofa, uncomfortable, fiddling with his hands. "Mrs. Martha, I'm going to be direct. My daughter and your son owe me money. A lot of money. I lent them $50,000 2 years ago for a down payment on a luxury car they couldn't afford." $50,000. Just on the car. "And now they come to me every month with excuses. It's work. It's the expenses. It's this and that. But they never have the money." He looked at me intently. "Diana mentioned that you are considering selling this house. She asked me to talk to you to convince you that it's a good idea." There it was. They had sent him as an emissary, thinking Diana's father would have more influence over me than they did. "And what would you gain from that, Ernest?" He looked down, ashamed. "My daughter promised me that if you sell the house, she would pay me what she owes, with interest." Interest. What a charming family. "Ernest, this house is mine. Not Chris's. Mine. And it is not for sale." His expression changed from hope to frustration. "Mrs. Martha, be reasonable. You're an older woman alone. You don't need this whole house. Think about your son, about their future." "My future or your future?" I stood up. "This conversation is over. You can leave." Ernest stood up angry. "You're making a mistake. Chris and Diana will find a way to get that money with or without your help." "Are those threats, Ernest? Are you threatening me in my own home?" He took a step back, realizing he had gone too far. No, of course not. I'm just saying, well, young people find solutions." He left my house, slamming the door. I immediately called Henry. I told him about Ernest's visit. "Martha, this is escalating. I think you should consider taking legal action now." "Not yet, but I want you to put extra surveillance on all my properties, and I want security cameras installed in this house by tomorrow." "Cameras?" "Yes. If they're going to try something, I want video proof." Henry sighed, but agreed. The next day, while Chris and Diana were out, a technical team installed discrete cameras throughout the house. Living room, kitchen, hallways. Places where they could capture conversations and actions without being obvious. The technician showed me how to access the recordings from my phone. "Any movement will be recorded, ma'am." That night, Chris came home accompanied by Matt. I watched them from my room through the camera app. They sat in the living room, speaking in low voices. I turned up the volume on my phone. "I already spoke to my contact at the property registry," Matt was saying. "We can forge a power of attorney. With that and your ID, we could sell the house without her knowing until it's too late." My blood froze. "Are you sure it will work?" Chris asked. "It worked last time until that damn accountant stuck his nose in it, but this time we'll be more careful. We'll use a different notary in another state." Chris was silent for a moment. "I don't know, Matt. She's my mother." For a second, I felt a flash of hope. Maybe there was something left of the son I raised, but then Matt spoke. "Your mother has controlled you your whole life. It's time to take what's yours. That house should be yours anyway." "You're right," Chris said finally. "Let's do it. How much time do you need?" "Give me 2 weeks, but I need $10,000 up front for the bribes." $10,000. Chris nodded. "I'll get it." They shook hands. I had just witnessed my son agree to steal my house for a second time. This time there was video evidence. This time there would be no escape for him. I saved the recording and sent it immediately to Henry with a message. "That's enough. Prepare everything." The next few days were the hardest of my life. I had to keep acting normal as if I knew nothing while they planned my destruction. Chris even brought me flowers one day. "To brighten your day, Mom." Flowers bought with money he probably took from a credit card he couldn't pay. Diana cooked dinner one night, calling me to the table with a sweet smile. I thought it would be nice to have dinner together as a family. Family. That word had lost all meaning in this house. I ate in silence while they chatted animatedly, playing the part of the perfect family. But I knew the truth. I always knew. On Friday afternoon, Henry called me. "Everything is ready." I interviewed 3 notaries and found the one Matt was going to use. They paid him $5,000 up front to forge the documents. I have his full statement. He's cooperating with the authorities in exchange for immunity. Perfect. "Martha, are you sure you want to do this?" "Once we take this step, there's no turning back." I looked around my room at the pictures of Chris as a child, at the memories of a life that no longer existed. "I'm sure, but I don't want them to go to jail. He's still my son." "Then what do you want to do?" I smiled. "I want them to learn a lesson they will never forget. And I have the perfect plan." The plan was simple but devastating. Ernest was organizing a big family dinner for the following Saturday. Diana had mentioned it casually, saying her father wanted to get the whole family together to celebrate. Celebrate what she didn't say, but I knew. They were going to announce the supposed sale of my house to brag about their victory before it even happened. They were going to humiliate me one last time in front of everyone. But that night was going to be very different from what they planned. That night I was going to reveal who I really was, and their world of lies was going to collapse like a house of cards. "Henry, I need you to come to that dinner," I told him, "and bring all the documents, all of them." Saturday arrived faster than I expected. I woke up early with a knot in my stomach that was a mix of nerves and anticipation. Today was the day everything would change. I bathed calmly. I dressed in an elegant wine-colored suit that I had bought especially for this occasion. I did my makeup carefully. I pulled my hair back into a sophisticated bun. When I looked in the mirror, I saw Martha the businesswoman, not Martha the submissive whom they knew. I saw the woman who had built an empire in silence. And that woman was not afraid. I went downstairs around 4 in the afternoon. Chris and Diana were already ready. He was in a suit that was a bit too tight. She was in an emerald dress she had probably bought with a credit card she couldn't afford. They both went quiet when they saw me. "Mom, you look different," Chris said, unable to hide his surprise. "Thank you, son. I thought a special occasion deserved dressing up a bit." Diana looked me up and down suspiciously. "Why so elegant? It's just a family dinner." "Every dinner is important when shared with loved ones," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. The car ride was tense. Chris drove while Diana checked her phone constantly. I sat in the back seat looking out the window, mentally preparing for what was coming. Ernest's house was in a pretentious neighborhood with large houses of cheap construction, all facade like its owner. When we arrived, there were several cars parked outside. The whole family was there. We entered, and the noise of conversations greeted us. Ernest was in the center of the living room, talking loudly as always, surrounded by his sons and daughters. Betty Diana's mother was in the kitchen overseeing the food. Jasmine and Iris Diana's sisters were sitting on the sofa, dressed like they were going to a gala. Nobody greeted me when I entered. A few curious glances, a couple of murmurs, but no genuine greeting. I was invisible again. Perfect. The less they noticed me, the better the surprise would be. I sat in a chair in the corner of the living room, observing. Chris and Diana immediately joined the group, laughing and talking, fitting perfectly into that superficial atmosphere. An hour later, Ernest announced that dinner was ready. We all moved to the dining room. The table was set with white tablecloths and dishes that tried to look fine, but clearly weren't. I sat at the end of the table in the corner, away from everyone. Again. Invisible. Dinner began with the usual noise of cutlery and overlapping conversations. Ernest told exaggerated stories about his business, bragging about sales that probably never happened. His children laughed at the appropriate moments, feeding his ego. Then when everyone was on their main course, Ernest stood up and tapped his glass with a knife. "Family, I want to make an important announcement." The dining room fell silent. All eyes turned to him. "As you know, my dear daughter Diana and her husband Chris have been going through some tough times financially," some murmurs of sympathy. "But I am proud to say that they have finally found a solution." He looked directly at me with a triumphant smile. "Chris has decided to sell his mother's house, a very mature and responsible decision. With that money, they can pay off their debts and start a new life." Applause. The entire family applauded, as if they had just announced something wonderful. Chris stood up, taking Diana's hand. "Thank you all for your support, and I want to especially thank my mother for being so understanding and generous." He looked at me, expecting me to say something, to nod to validate his lie, but I just looked at him in silence. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "Mom says yes." Diana intervened quickly, laughing nervously. "She's just a little emotional, right, Martha?" Everyone was looking at me now, waiting. Slowly I stood up. "There is something you all need to know," I said, my voice clear and firm. Chris turned pale. "Mom, you don't need to—" "That house is not for sale," I interrupted, "because that house does not belong to Chris. It's mine. It's in my name. It has always been in my name." Murmurs of confusion swept the table. Ernest frowned. "Well, yes, technically it's in your name, but Chris is your son. It's practically the same thing." "No, Ernest, it's not the same thing. And there's something else that none of you know." I took out my phone and dialed Henry's number. "You can come in now." The front door opened, and Henry walked into the dining room carrying a leather briefcase. The confusion on everyone's faces was visible. "Who is this?" Ernest asked. "This is Henry, my accountant and lawyer," I replied. Henry stood next to me, opened his briefcase, and took out a thick folder. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Henry Ruiz, and I legally represent Mrs. Martha." "Lawyer? Why do you need a lawyer?" Chris asked, his voice trembling slightly. "To protect my interests, and to show you who I really am." Henry began to take out documents and place them on the table. Property titles, financial statements, photographs of properties. "For the last 30 years, I continued, while all of you treated me like a servant, like someone insignificant, I was building something big." I pointed to the documents. "These are the property deeds for 5 restaurants, Taste of Home. Maybe you've heard of them." I saw Iris gasp. The Taste of Home restaurants, the ones all over the city. The very same, all mine. I am the owner. The silence was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. I also own 2 apartments that I rent out, several commercial properties, and I have investments totaling— I looked at Henry. $1,800,000 in investment accounts, he completed. "My total net worth," I said, letting each word fall like a bomb, "is approximately $5 million. Diana dropped her fork. The metallic sound against the plate was the only thing heard for several seconds. Chris was as white as a ghost. Ernest opened and closed his mouth several times, unable to speak. "Impossible," Betty muttered. "You're just a housewife." I corrected her. "I was just a housewife to you. because you never bothered to really get to know me. You never asked about my life, my interests, my past. You just assumed I was insignificant. I looked directly at Chris. Including you, son. Tears began to roll down my cheeks, but my voice remained firm. I built all of this in silence because I wanted to know if you loved me for who I was, not for my money. Mom, Chris tried to speak, but I stopped him with a gesture. And now I know the answer. You tried to steal my house? Twice. You used fake documents. You conspired with Matt to commit fraud. I took out my phone and tapped the screen. The video started playing on the small screen, but the audio was clear. Chris and Matt planning to sell my house without my knowledge. I have it all recorded. I have proof of everything. Chris's face completely fell. Diana began to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic of being discovered. I could send you both to jail, I continued. Fraud, forgery of documents, conspiracy. But I won't. Do you know why? No one answered. Because despite everything, you are still my son. And maybe, just maybe, this will teach you something about respect and consequences. The silence in that dining room was deafening. All eyes darted between the documents on the table, Chris and Diana crumbling in their chairs, and me standing with my head held high for the first time in years. Ernest was the first to try to recover. Well, this is wonderful, Martha. Who would have imagined a successful businesswoman in our family? His tone had changed completely from condescending to fawning in seconds. Don't say our family, Ernest. I cut him off coldly. You never treated me like family. You treated me like trash. All of you did. I pointed around the table. You ignored me. You humiliated me. You made me feel invisible in my own home. Betty tried to speak. Martha, if we ever made you feel bad, it wasn't our intention. It wasn't your intention, I interrupted. When Diana kicked me out of my own kitchen screaming at me like I was an employee, that wasn't your intention. When you, Betty, whispered just loud enough for me to hear that my house needed a real owner, that wasn't your intention. When you sat me at the end of the table at this dinner as if I were less than all of you, that wasn't your intention. Every word came out of me like a sharp knife. 30 years of silence, 5 years of humiliation, all coming out at once. You judged me without knowing me. You despised me because you assumed I had nothing, that I was nothing. Jasmine, Diana's younger sister, looked down in shame. Iris stared at her hands. Ernest was no longer smiling. Chris still couldn't speak, his eyes red, his jaw tight. Diana cried silently, her makeup running, her emerald dress no longer so glamorous. But the worst part, I continued, and my voice cracked slightly, the worst part wasn't you. It was my own son. Chris, I gave you everything. I raised you alone after your father died. I worked day and night so you could have a good life, a good education. I loved you unconditionally. I wiped away a tear rolling down my cheek. And you paid me back with betrayal. You tried to steal my house. You were going to put me in a nursing home to take my property. Mom, please. Chris finally found his voice. We were desperate. The debts, the collectors. And you never thought to ask me for help, I shouted, and my voice echoed in the dining room. It never occurred to you to come to me, your mother, and tell me the truth, to ask me for help like an honest man. I thought you didn't have any money, Chris muttered. You thought I didn't have money, but you still wanted to take my house. The only thing of value you thought I had. What kind of son does that? Silence fell again. Chris had no answer for that, because there was no answer. Martha, please. Diana spoke through her sobs. I am so sorry. If you had known what Diana, if you had known I had money, you would have treated me better. Is that the point? I only deserve respect if I have money. She shook her head frantically. No, it's not that. It's just... What? My voice was like ice. I was jealous, she finally admitted. Jealous of your relationship with Chris. Jealous that he loved you so much. I wanted to be number one in his life, and you were in the way. There it was. The naked, ugly truth. So you decided to destroy me, to turn me into nothing so you could be everything. Diana didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Henry, who had remained silent all this time, finally spoke. Mrs. Martha, do you want me to proceed with legal action? Everyone at the table tensed. Chris's eyes widened in terror. He looked at me pleading. Mom, please, no. I'll do anything. Please don't send me to jail. It would ruin my life. And what about my life, Chris? What about the 5 years I lost being treated like trash in my own home? What about my dignity, my peace, my happiness? I sat down again, emotionally exhausted. I'm not sending you to jail, I said finally. But there are conditions. I saw the relief flood his face. First, you and Diana are moving out of my house. You have 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Where are we going to go? Diana asked. That is your problem, not mine. Second, you are going to therapy, couples therapy and individual therapy, and you are going to work on your problems like responsible adults. Third, I continued, I am going to pay your debts, all of them. Ernest leaned forward immediately, his eyes shining with greed. I will pay the $200,000 you owe. I looked at him intently. But not to you. I will pay the creditors directly. You will not see a single cent. The disappointment was obvious on Ernest's face. And Ernest, about the $50,000 they owe you, I will pay that too. But considering you tried to pressure me into selling my house and threatened my family, I will pay it without interest. It's more than you deserve. His face turned red with fury, but he said nothing. He knew he had no right to complain. Fourth, I looked at Chris and Diana. You are going to work. For real. Diana, there's a waitress opening at one of my restaurants. The salary is $2,000 a month plus tips. If you want the job, it's yours, but you will have to work hard, follow rules, and earn every cent. Diana looked at me in horror. A waitress? But I've never worked in service. Exactly. It's time you learned what honest work is to serve others to earn a living with dignity. And Chris, I continued, you will continue in your current job, but every month you will report your expenses to me. We are going to make a budget together with Henry supervising. You are going to learn to live within your means to be financially responsible. Fifth and last, my voice was ice. If you ever try to deceive me, steal from me, or disrespect me again, I will cut off all contact with you. I will disinherit you completely. There will be no second chances. Chris nodded vigorously. Yes, Mom, whatever you say. I promise. Promises mean nothing, Chris. You've broken enough of them. It's actions that matter now. I stood up. Henry collected the documents and put them back in his briefcase. This dinner is over for me. Henry will take me home. I walked to the door, but before leaving, I turned back one last time. One more thing. For 30 years, I built a successful business without anyone's support. I did it with hard work, honesty, and respect for others. Those are the values I tried to teach you, Chris. But at some point, you lost those values. You let yourself be carried away by greed, by appearances, by wanting to live a life you couldn't afford. I looked at the whole family gathered in that dining room. All of you live in big houses with bigger debts. You drive luxury cars you can't pay for. You wear expensive clothes bought with maxed-out credit cards. It's all a facade. It's all a lie. I lived in the same modest house for 25 years. I drove the same car for 15 years. I wore simple clothes, but I built real wealth, not appearances. And I did it with dignity, without stepping on anyone, without stealing, without lying. My voice broke again. I hope this lesson teaches you something. I hope you learn that respect isn't bought with money, it's earned with actions. And that family isn't just who shares your blood, but who treats you with love and dignity. I left that house with Henry behind me. The cool night air hit my face, and I finally let the tears flow freely. I cried for the son I lost, for the years of humiliation, for the family I never really had. But I also cried with relief, because I had finally spoken my truth. I had finally defended myself, and even though it hurt, I knew I had done the right thing. In the car, Henry drove in silence for several minutes. You did the right thing, Martha, he said finally. I know, I replied, looking out the window at the illuminated city. But it still hurts. True love always hurts, he said, but self-respect hurts less than constant betrayal. He was right. For the first time in years, I felt free. The next 2 weeks were strange and painful. Chris and Diana moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, a modest place they were able to rent with the money I lent them for the deposit. It wasn't luxurious, it didn't have the comforts Diana was used to, but it was honest. It was a start. The day they left my house, Chris hugged me at the door. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything." I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Watching him leave with his suitcases, with that weight of shame on his shoulders, broke my heart. But I knew it was necessary. Sometimes true love means letting people face the consequences of their actions. Diana started working at my downtown restaurant. Salvador, my manager, reported to me weekly on her performance. At first she complained about everything, he told me. Her shoes hurt, the hours were too long, the customers were rude, but little by little she's improving. Yesterday I saw her helping a coworker who was behind on her tables without anyone asking her to. That gave me hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was still some humanity in her. Chris stayed at his tech job. Every month end he sent me a detailed report of his expenses, as we had agreed. Henry reviewed everything and informed me. "They are being very careful," he told me. "No unnecessary expenses. They are learning." I, for my part, rediscovered my house. Without the constant tension from Chris and Diana, without the looks of contempt, without the orders disguised as requests, my home became my sanctuary again. I invited my sister Doris to stay with me for a few weeks. "I never thought this day would come," she said, as we drank coffee in my living room. "I see you differently, Martha. Stronger." "I feel different," I admitted. "For the first time in years, I feel like myself." Doris took my hand. "You were always strong. You just needed to remember it." I spent more time at my restaurants, getting to know my employees, getting more directly involved in operations. I didn't have to hide anymore. A month after the revealing dinner, I received an unexpected call. It was Diana. "Martha, can we talk in person?" My first instinct was to say no, but something in her voice, a humility I had never heard before, made me accept. We met at a neutral coffee shop far from my house and her apartment. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a table in the back. She looked different. No excessive makeup, simple clothes, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked real. "Thanks for coming," she said when I sat down. We ordered coffee and sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. "I want to apologize," she finally began. "For real. Not an empty apology like the ones I gave you before. A real apology." I looked at her without saying anything, waiting. "These last few months have been the hardest of my life," she continued. "Working at the restaurant opened my eyes, seeing how other people work hard every day, how they fight to support their families with dignity. I realized how horrible I was to you." Her eyes filled with genuine tears. "You worked like that your whole life. You built an empire by being a waitress, a cook, an entrepreneur, and I treated you like trash. I treated you worse than a stranger." She took a sip of her coffee with trembling hands. "My therapist made me see that my cruelty came from my own insecurities. I come from a family where everything is about appearances," she explained. "My father always bragging about his business, even though he barely makes enough to get by. My mother spending on expensive clothes to impress the neighbors. My sisters competing over who had the most successful husband, the biggest house. I grew up believing that a person's worth was measured by what they had, not by who they were. And when I met Chris," she continued, "he was perfect on paper, good job, educated, kind. But when he mentioned his mother lived in a big house, I assumed you had money, that you were well off." She dried her tears. "When we moved in with you and I saw your simple lifestyle, your modest clothes, your old car, I was disappointed. I felt like Chris had lied to me about his family. And instead of seeing your kindness, your generosity in taking us in, I only saw what I considered poverty," she admitted with shame. "And I blamed you. I blamed you for not being the rich mother-in-law I expected, for not giving us the luxurious life I thought I deserved. I listened to her in silence, processing every word. "Now I understand how foolish I was," she said. "How cruel, how unfair. You gave us a home when we needed it. You fed us, you took care of us, and I paid you back with contempt." "Why are you telling me all this now?" I finally asked. "Because I want you to know that I'm changing, for real. Not because of the conditions you set, but because I finally see who you are. And I'm ashamed I didn't see it sooner." We drank our coffee in silence for a moment. "Diana," I said finally, "I appreciate your honesty, but apologies are just the beginning. Real change is proven over time with consistent actions." "I know," she nodded, "and I'm going to prove it to you. I'm not asking you to forgive me now. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that I'm going to be better." We said goodbye at the coffee shop door. There were no hugs, no exaggerated promises, just a silent understanding that maybe with a lot of time and effort, we could build something new, something based on mutual respect instead of lies and appearances. I drove home with mixed feelings. Part of me wanted to believe that Diana had really changed. Another part remained cautious, protecting my heart from more disappointment. That night, as I prepared for bed in my quiet but peaceful house, I reflected on everything that had happened. I had lost the illusion of the perfect family I always wanted, but I had gained something more valuable: my dignity, my voice, my power. I was no longer the invisible Martha who endured in silence. I was the Martha who had built an empire, the Martha who defended herself, the Martha who knew her worth. And that Martha was stronger than ever. I looked at the photographs on my nightstand. Chris as a child, smiling without malice, without the corruption that would come later. I touched the photo tenderly. "I still love you, son," I whispered. "But now I love myself too, and that changes everything." 6 months passed since that dinner that changed everything. 6 months of healing, of rebuilding, of learning. My life had taken a completely different course than I imagined. I no longer hid behind the facade of a simple housewife. I now visited my restaurants, openly made important decisions, met with investors. The real Martha had come out of the shadows, and she had no intention of hiding again. Chris and Diana were still in their modest apartment. He continued at his job, and she surprisingly had been promoted to shift supervisor at my restaurant. Salvador reported that she was one of the most dedicated employees. "She's changed completely," he told me. "She arrives early, stays late when necessary, treats everyone with respect. It's a remarkable transformation." Therapy was helping them. Chris called me every week, not to ask for money or favors, but just to talk. Real conversations about his life, his fears, his lessons. "Mom, my therapist made me realize I never really grew up," he told me in one of those calls. "I always expected others to solve my problems. First you, then I thought Diana with her family, then easy money. I never faced my responsibilities as an adult man." Hearing him admit that gave me hope. "I'm proud of you for recognizing that, son," I told him. "The first step to changing is accepting the truth about yourself." "I failed you, Mom." His voice broke. "I failed in everything you taught me." "Yes, you failed," I replied honestly. "But failure isn't permanent unless you give up. You're not giving up. You're working on being better. That's what matters." One afternoon, I received an unexpected invitation. It was from Ernest. He asked me to come to his house, that he needed to talk to me. I hesitated a long time before accepting, but curiosity won. When I arrived, I found a very different scene from that disastrous dinner. The house was the same, but there was something different in the atmosphere. Ernest greeted me at the door alone without his usual arrogance. "Martha, thank you for coming. I know I don't deserve your time." He showed me into the living room. No one else was there. "Where is your family?" I asked. "I asked for privacy. This is between you and me." We sat, and he sighed deeply. "I want to apologize, not just for what happened at that dinner, but for years of treating you badly, of looking down on you, of being a hypocrite. This was unexpected. After that night," he continued, "when everyone saw your success, your dignity, your strength, I kept thinking, I thought about the man I am, and I didn't like what I saw. He rubbed his face with his hands. All my life I've lived pretending to be more than I am. My business barely makes ends meet, but I brag as if I'm a millionaire. I've put my family in debt to keep up appearances. I taught my daughters the wrong values. And when I saw that you, whom I treated as inferior, were 10 times more successful than me, not just in money, but in character, I was ashamed, he admitted. I was deeply ashamed. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I want to change. I'm selling the luxury car I can't afford. I'm cutting unnecessary expenses. I want to teach my family what really matters before it's too late. And I wanted you to know that your example, your dignity in the midst of it all, inspired me to be better. We talked for an hour. It was a real conversation without pretensions, without masks. When I left, I felt that maybe, just maybe, something good had come out of all this pain. My 64th birthday arrived without me expecting it. I hadn't made special plans. I thought I'd spend it quietly at home. But in the mid-afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there were Chris and Diana holding a pink box. "Happy birthday, Mom," Chris said with a shy smile. I let them in, confused but curious. "We made this for you," Diana said, opening the box. It was a homemade cake, clearly made with effort, though not perfect. "We made it ourselves." "Well, Diana did. I helped a little, but almost ruined it." Chris laughed nervously. It was a simple cake, decorated clumsily but with obvious love. "We know it doesn't make up for anything," Diana said, "but we wanted to show you that we're trying, that we're learning." We ate cake together in my living room. The conversation was awkward at first, but gradually became more natural. We talked about simple things, their jobs, their therapy, their small daily achievements. For the first time in years, I felt like I was really with my son, not with a stranger who wore his name. When they left that night, Chris hugged me at the door. "Someday I hope to earn your trust back completely, Mom. I know it will take years, but I'm going to work on it every single day." "You're already on the right path," I told him. "Just keep going." I watched them leave in their old car, the one they had bought with their own honestly earned money. It was no longer the luxury car they couldn't afford. It was a modest car, but it was theirs, a symbol of their new life. That night alone in my house, I reflected on the whole journey. I had lost the illusion of the perfect family, but I had gained something more real. I had learned that true love sometimes means setting hard boundaries. That respect isn't begged for, it's demanded. That your worth doesn't depend on how others treat you, but on how you treat yourself. I thought about all the women who, like me, endure in silence, who let themselves be stepped on to keep the peace, who hide who they really are for fear of rejection. And I wanted to tell them that there is another way, a path where you can be strong and loving at the same time, where you can forgive without forgetting, where you can give second chances without being naive. My story didn't have the fairy tale ending I expected when I was young. Chris didn't turn out to be the perfect son. Diana wasn't the loving daughter-in-law. Her family didn't welcome me with open arms. But I found something better than a fairy tale. I found my own voice. I found my own power. I found my own peace. And I discovered that sometimes the best gift you can give someone isn't solving their problems, but allowing them to face the consequences of their actions and grow through them. I looked out the window at my garden softly lit by the moonlight. This was my home, my sanctuary, my kingdom built with work, dignity, and self-respect. And no one ever again would take it from me, because now I knew my value. And that knowledge was more powerful than any wealth, stronger than any betrayal, more durable than any pain. I am Martha. I am 64 years old. I built an empire in silence. I survived the betrayal of my own son. I rose up stronger than I ever was. And this is my story. The story of a woman who refused to remain invisible, who refused to be less than she was, who chose her dignity over the comfort of illusion. And if my story can inspire even one person to defend their worth, to set boundaries, to not allow others to make them feel small, then every moment of pain will have been worth it. Because in the end, the most important thing isn't how others treat you. It's how you treat yourself. And I finally learned to treat myself with the respect and love I always deserved.